here. And welcome everybody to episode 163 of Two Goalies, One Mic, brought to you by, of course, Fatty Beer Company, Western New York's premier market and tap room, with over 300 different beers to choose from at 8 different Western New York locations. Make sure you go check them out at Fatty Beer on Instagram and Twitter. You can find them on Facebook and, of course, Buffalo Logo Apparel, one of the best spots to get any of your Buffalo sports apparel needs right now with the Bills, upcoming with the Sabres. They have a lot of great options, whether you're into shirts, your hats, your hoodies. They got everything. You can get this one right here, the RJ ball cap right there. It's an absolute beauty. I think, Walt, you got one of those, didn't you?
Yeah, I think. Oh,
Didn't
where'd
you?
I put it? I think it's right over there. Yeah, I got the Dominic Hasek one.
Listen. Oh, you got the Hasek one? Hell yeah, there we go. Right. And there's Hurls, my man, Connor Hurley, popping in on the show. Better late than never. Hurls, what's going on, bud?
How we doing? Good to be back.
Good to be back. That's good to hear. Obviously, we recorded. We played our episode with Dion Dawkins this past Friday. Great debut with the new platform with Built in Buffalo. A lot, not to say a lot has happened since then, but Sabres are prepping to open up their season over in Europe against in a back-to-back with the New Jersey Devils. A little bit of redemption, right? A little vengeance maybe for Lindy. Just your guys' first impression of the team right now. Obviously, now that the preseason's over, training camp's over, and what do you guys think this final roster could look like? I'll start with you all.
Well, I think it's definitely been a unique preseason so far with the Europe element added in, and I'd say it's gone about as well as you could hope for. I mean, they haven't really played NHL caliber teams yet in the preseason, but the teams they have played, they've been able to beat pretty handedly, and they've looked strong in every game. Even if they had a weak first period, they bounce back in the next two periods. So I think that's definitely a big positive. I think it's going to be a little bit harder for some guys on the outside of that 23-man roster. I know they sent 27 players over. I think for some of those four guys that weren't initially planned on being that 23-man roster, maybe a little difficult for them to crack the roster right away if they're not given an opportunity. But other than that, I think the preseason's gone pretty well.
Yeah, I couldn't tend to agree with you more. Obviously, the title of this episode is new captain, new coach, new. Like, we can't even call Lindy new, right? Like he's refurbished, right? We're gonna call him refurbished Lindy, and then like new vibes. Like I would say I was more optimistic coming into last season than I was this one. I still have my doubts, Walt. I'm pretty sure you do too, and I know Connor does. But this team has impressed. To your point, they haven't played full-on NHL caliber rosters. Kind of a mix in like against the Penguins. Like you didn't have like your stars playing, but they've handled when you had your most for the most part your roster on the ice. You've handled business, right? Like you've outscored teams dramatically. Your goaltending has looked good. Your star players have been doing the things that they're expected to do. How is that going to translate though against a Devils team that again still really haven't found their? I mean, they found goaltending. They hope, but is it Markstrom? Did they bring in Markstrom?
Yeah.
So you would hope that he, what he was doing in Calgary would carry over with New Jersey. They have Jack Hughes. They have a very good team, a very young team. Will that translate? Lindy's style translate with this roster? And again, in a back-to-back with the Devils, not even on home soil. You're over different type of crowd. You're gonna be playing at the O2 Arena. That's called.
Yeah.
How is that gonna translate? That style of play against their very first real test, an actual NHL roster.
Well, I think that's the biggest question, right? Like, I think a lot of fans and a lot of media members are questioning the additions this offseason from the Sabres. They completely revamped the bottom six, which I think leaves the team in a better position than they were at the end of last season. But the biggest question right now is it enough? Did they add enough scoring? Are Tage Thompson, Alex Tuck, our big stars going to return to their form from the 2022-2023 season? And if they do, and it seems like they've revamped the bottom six enough that it could potentially be enough, given the fact that the defense and goaltending was largely improved last season. Another big question is obviously the power play. And I do think a lot of that comes down to coaching. So in that sense, I think there is reason for optimism. Obviously, bringing in a more established guy than Don Granato and Lindy Ruff. He coached this team that the Sabres are playing in the Devils last season. He worked with the Stars before that, and all in his time since leaving the Sabres back in 2014. And he said himself numerous times this offseason, he's a different, reformed, I would say more modern coach than he was even in the 10 years he left the Sabres. But it remains to be seen if this team did enough in this offseason to improve upon the disappointing results from last season. And there are a lot of injuries, of course, and we can get into that. But as it stands right now, it is largely the exact same team from last season, aside from a different third and fourth line. And myself included, and I know from the tweets I've seen from both of you guys this offseason, I'm a bit concerned that the team is not going to have enough goal scoring. You bought out Jeff Skinner. You have $7 million in cap space that is still yet to be spent. And you're basically running it back, hopefully that improved hitting and improved defensive structure from your forward group is going to be a little bit better. So I guess we'll see, but there are reasons for optimism.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the one thing we know for sure is this is going to be a much tougher team to play against. Like, I don't really seen the full scope of what we're going to expect from this bottom six, because I'm not going to get it twisted. Don't expect a lot of scoring out of at least that bottom line, even the bottom six. I mean, you can try and imagine what the lines will look like. I know we've seen a lot of that from different accounts on Twitter. But my imagination would say, it depends if Kulich does officially make this roster, which I think all indications will say he probably will. I don't think they would bring him over to Europe with them, if he's not going to make the team. Obviously, we'll have an idea of what that starting lineup is going to look like, hopefully in the next 24 hours. Did they practice today? Did we get any lines during practice, like who was playing where?
I didn't see anything today, no.
Nothing? Okay. So you have to imagine we'll know in the next 24 hours what these lines are going to look like. But all indications for me is that you're going to have Zucker on that third line, probably centered by it's going to be McLeod. And it could be, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Krebs? Is it going to be Kulich? I don't know. Walt, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see a guy like Kulich make the roster. I think the fact that they're starting the season off in kind of a weird spot may push him out. I think if they gave him like a few more preseason looks, like if it was a normal preseason, kind of like what happened with Benson, I think he'd have an easier shot at making it. But the fact that they're kind of having to rush into this opening night roster without many preseason games for the NHL guys, I think it might push him out. Me personally, I think adding a guy like Kulich to the lineup makes him a lot more exciting. And it could also add a potential scoring element to that third line that I think they kind of lack right now. Like a guy like Ryan McLeod, he's really fun to watch, really fast, but he's just never really been a big producer at the NHL level. Jason Zucker, he's up there in age now. They kind of used him in a more defensive role last year. I think he barely got 30 points last season. So I think adding a guy like Kulich to that line could help that offense, but I'm also not too confident that he starts there right away. But I do think if that bottom six continues to struggle producing or struggles with producing as they're all kind of new to the Sabres, I do think he'll be one of the first call-ups, if not the first call-up.
I'd have to agree. And me and Hurls have talked about it a lot. Like, in a perfect world for me, like I would have much rather than, I know you probably feel the same way. And I'm not sure if Kevin M just had a lot of issues trying to make this happen. Players didn't want to come here, but to get a bona fide guy to play in that top six, so you could slide a Zach Benson down to your third line. So you could have, if you're going to build that third, that everything around speed, because you want a guy like McLeod, who, is one of the faster players in the league, then you want to surround him with speed. Am I right or am I wrong? And, Zach Benson's got some good feet underneath him. It would have been nice to, slide a Kulich into that position, or just anybody else, and then have Zucker on the other side. I don't feel confident that we're going to, like to Connor's point to start the show, that we're going to have enough scoring to get to be in a contention for a wild card spot. I know the goaltending will be, I think as long as Samuelson shows us that he can stay healthy and be the same guy he was 2 seasons ago, defensively, I think we'll be okay. But offensively, one major injury to that top 6, they're screwed.
Yeah, and that's the big question. That's, I think, the major concern of this entire fan base at the moment, is that they didn't do enough for this top 6. And you saw what happened with Quinn last season. I don't necessarily think he's injury prone, but 2 freak injuries, and they basically lost him for the entire year. I do think he's the type of guy that's capable of scoring 25, 30 goals this season, especially on the top power play unit. I think he showed his underlying numbers when he did play last season, especially at 5-on-5, were really, really good. And you add him to that top power play unit, and he's going to be able to produce, especially on the other side of Tage. And I'm interested to see how they run that top power play unit. I saw an article today from our good friend Matthew Fairburn, and he was talking a lot about getting more guys to the front of the net, working on tips, working on screens, getting dirty goals. I think a lot of the power play last season was really stagnant. They were just passing the puck from the side back to Darlene at the quarterback and not getting too many people in front of the net. I think Lindy, hopefully, and Seth Appert, with some new, fresh ideas, will be a little bit more creative with how they handle that first power play unit. You have a lot of talent. It could be the combination of Peterka, Tuck, Cousins, Darlene, Tage. You can use a variety of different guys, but they need to be more creative, because if this team is going to have any chance of getting to that final wild card spot, they need to be at least in the top 15 of power play units in the league. That's what they were in 2022, 2023, and they were one of the worst units in the league last season, and they still only needed 5 more games, 5 more wins to make the playoffs. So if you improve that, even marginally from what it was last season, that's going to go a long way. And I think that top unit, a combination of Tage and Quinn on the bumpers, Tuck, Cousins in the middle, and then Darlene as the quarterback, I think that could be a good unit. So we'll see what they do with it, but that's going to be a massive, massive difference this season.
We actually had a question here from Steve Noble. Which 4 players of the 27 in Prague currently do you think will not be on the roster when they return home? Start with you, Connor.
Probably Kulik. I'd say Brusek, Gilbert, and then as scratches for the 3rd and 4th games of the season, then probably Krebs, I would have to say.
Krebs, I tend to agree with you definitely on there. I never understood bringing him back personally, other than the fact that maybe he doesn't want to admit failure in that Eichel deal. Walt, your thoughts?
I'd say for me, I think the 3 or the 4 would probably. I think Kulik. I think if he's obviously not playing, I don't think he's a guy that keep up. I can maybe see them keeping up Rusek over him. So I think he'd be my pick, even though it might not be the right choice. I think James Reimer. I think they're going to try to see if he could clear waivers. I think he should be able to, but I think it'll be close because he has a pretty small cap hit. And then I think a guy like Kel Clegg, he's probably going back down to Rochester. And then I'd say, one of the other defensemen, maybe like a Gilbert or someone like that, I think will also probably go down to Rochester.
Yeah, I know he's a hometown kid, but I definitely agree with you there. Denny Gilbert is probably, going to Rochester. I think Peyton Krebs is definitely a bubble player. I know they signed him, but I don't understand it. They waited so long to sign him. I don't know what he was holding out for. It's not like he deserved. Would you consider what he got an overpay?
I think so.
100%. He was an overpay, and I don't know. Kulik, I mean, depending on if he's in that lineup opening night, I think that's an indicator of where he'll be when he comes home. Because I mean, Lindy's going to want to start the season with a splash, right? He's not going to want to lose to the team that fired him. What was it, 7 months ago? So I imagine if he's on that opening night roster, he's on the team. And to your points too, Kel Clegg, definitely probably a guy that's going back to Rochester. And then who was the fourth one that you mentioned? It was
Reimer.
Reimer, yeah, James Reimer for sure. You know, he's on a two-way deal, obviously, but that's just he's making an NHL contract, playing games in Rochester. So, that being said, we talked with Dion a little bit about accountability, and he gave us some examples of what it meant to be accountable for him when he was in college. He actually told us a story about where did he play again? Where was the game being played, Hurls? Temple, yeah. But we told him about the movie Miracle, which he unfortunately has never seen, and he told us he had a coach who was Matt Rule, who's in Nebraska now, made the entire team do the same exact thing, but in football terms, after a game, after they got shelled, and he called them gassers. But accountability, we've seen a lot of it in practice so far. I know we've seen push-ups, and people can say what they want about that, but it's something we haven't seen in 10 years, at least not from a media standpoint. And we've heard a lot of mixed things from media, like guys like Paul Hamilton will say, "Oh no, the practices are hard. You guys don't know what you're talking about." And now we start to hear from those same people, "Yeah, things are a little bit tighter around here than they've been in the past." So I don't know what to take from that, but for all what we've seen, we're gonna get a shades of what Lindy Ruff used to be in terms of accountability. But this is our first time really talking since the Lindy hire, and since he's been able to really get his hands on this roster. How do you feel about the Lindy Ruff effect? How is that going to affect this team? Not just your bottom six guys like we talked about before. Obviously I think they're going to be strong there and tougher to play against. But the top six guys, how is that going to help them?
I think it's going to be huge. I think a coach, could have a decent impact on a team. And with this Sabres team, I think the difference between them missing the playoffs and making the playoffs is probably like an extra 6 or 7 points. I think that extra 6 or 7 points could get this current Sabres group into the playoffs. And I think a guy like Lindy, who took a New Jersey team that wasn't that great when he first started there, and after a year or so with that team, he kind of turned them into one of the NHL's powerhouses, even won a playoff series with them. And they were dominant at times to start that season in 22-23. So I think a guy like Lindy, I think he's absolutely huge in terms of the presence he'll have and kind of hopefully the impact he'll have on this team. I do think he's a coach that's capable of having a pretty sizable impact on a roster. I just hope it's a positive one. And I'm just kind of excited to kind of start the second Lindy era. We really don't have much to look forward to as Sabres fans, especially during this playoff drought. So I feel like just having a familiar face around, kind of the last guy to get us to the playoffs, which is crazy to think about back in town. I think it's good to have.
Yeah, you're not telling me, man. That is crazy that the last time this team was in the playoffs was under Lindy Ruff.
Yeah.
It's 13 years ago.
I mean, if you really think about it, it was the smartest move the organization could have made this offseason from a PR standpoint, in terms of getting the fans excited, in terms of hopefully having the building full for opening night, for Lindy's return, for the Goathead games, for a lot of different reasons. Irregardless isn't a word, but regardless of the hockey aspect of it, bringing Lindy back could not have made more sense. You needed something to get this fan base to get behind, and all of us and the nostalgia of everything else, combined with the fact that he is an experienced coach that preaches accountability, that demands a certain level of intensity and respect from his players. It is a really, really smart move. There were probably 3 or 4 good options that I don't necessarily think they considered, because as soon as they realized Lindy was available, and he was available for a month or two leading up to when they fired John Granato, they knew exactly what they were going to do. And if it turns out to be that extra edge that this young group needs to be the accountability and to be that structure that it seemed was lacking at certain points last season, especially in the first period, that was our biggest, I would say, the crux of the entire season, aside from the power play, was these slow starts. And I don't necessarily think you can put that all on coaching because the players do need to go out there and play. But at least some of it is getting your group prepared. And I don't think Johnny Granato was necessarily the guy that was able to do that. He was more of a player development coach. He wasn't a rah-rah type guy. I don't necessarily think he yelled and screamed when things went wrong. And you saw all of those slow starts last season, which got them down in games, and they were unable to come back, combined with the power play being absolutely atrocious. And Matt Ellis is now watching from the eye in the sky, and he's not running the power play anymore. So it's a variety of different things. It makes that a much better situation. But as many bad moves as the Sabres have made recently, hiring Lindy was very smart for a lot of different reasons.
It sucks too. I'm happy Matt Ellis is where he belongs. Personally, I think he should be selling hot dogs outside the arena. But could you imagine if they would have made the right decision to start last season and brought Pekka on as the assistant, and you could have Lindy and Mike Pekka on the same bench right now? How incredible would that be? You want to talk about nostalgia? Could you imagine two former Sabres captains coaching this team, ending a playoff drought? That would have been incredible.
Yeah, about as good as it gets. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I think that's
getting our asking for what's the saying? Wanting your cake before they hatch, or whatever. Yeah, but goaltending. Obviously, Levi is on this team. Like, he's not going to Rochester. I imagine that. Are they back-to-back nights that both these games?
Yeah.
Yep.
So he's getting one of these games, right?
I don't think they're
going to make. I don't think they're going to make.
About that earlier today. I don't necessarily think so.
You don't think so?
I don't necessarily think so. I think if UPL, obviously he'll start the first game, and I think, at least in my time, I think it's at noon or 10 a.m. on a Friday, and then they play again at 7 a.m. If you think he's your bell cow starter, which they signed him to a contract that would suggest that, and he plays extremely well in that first game, I think he gets the second game. It's earlier in the year. I really do believe that. And I think the only way, not the only way, but I think a legitimate chance that Levi gets sent down to Rochester is if UPL continues to play as well as he did in the second half of last season. And it turns into a situation where Levi is not getting games and he's not getting the development that he absolutely needs at this point in his career. And he's just riding the bench because you have to, or not that you have to, but your best interest of your hockey team is riding the hot hand in UPL. So I think that would be a good scenario for the Sabres, that they have a top 5 goalie in the league and UPL playing as he did in the second half of the year. But yeah, it starts as it currently does, as a 1-2 situation. I would hope that he could get 25 games this season. I think that would be good for his development in the NHL. But I was thinking about this exact scenario today. I think there's a legitimate possibility that UPL gets both games this weekend in Prague.
We'll see. What are your thoughts, Walt?
I think it's likely that they split them, but yeah, I definitely can't see a scenario where UPL maybe turns into a bit of a bell cow of a goalie for the Sabres. But I think that's going to take not only UPL playing well, I think that's also going to take the Sabres winning a lot of games with UPL too. I think if they're losing a bunch of games like 3-2 or something like that, despite UPL having a good game, I can see them trying to turn to Levi to kind of spice things up a bit, even though he can't really do anything on offense. But I think if UPL gets hot and the Sabres are winning, I can see them riding him for 55 plus games. But I think they do realize they have a guy like Levi waiting in the wings, and I think they will try to get him some games. And he seems pretty dialed in this preseason. I know he didn't really play more than a game and a half, but I think he's a guy they're going to rely upon this year, even if it's just a smaller role at the NHL level.
Over under 55 games for UPL.
I would say right around there. I could see anywhere from 50 to 60, depending on how he plays. I really do believe that.
I just don't know if Lindy is going to use him the same way that he did Ryan Miller in the past. I mean, I remember when Miller played 60 games, he even admitted, man, like, I was tired. And that you're talking about a guy you're talking about a guy who was like probably one of the best conditioned players in the team. I could see. I'm going to go under. I'm going to say he probably plays around 47 to inching close to 55. But I don't see him playing more than that. I judging from how Lindy has used his goalies in the past since leaving Buffalo, I don't see it. I don't know. That's just me. I definitely think I see Devin getting more than 25. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I mean I could see it as well, but I really do believe it is very much dependent upon how UPL performs, especially at the beginning of the season. If he's riding the way he was in the second half of last year, it's his net. And he's not going to go a bunch of back-to-backs, but I think he still will get the majority of the games. And I think even Lindy said it in his press conference. He mentioned Luukkonen by name, and he said that he's really, really excited to have as good of a goalie as he does in UPL.
Yeah.
So that was probably a big factor in him accepting the position, knowing that he believed in the starting goalie of this team, which currently it stands as UPL. Obviously, that depends on how he plays.
Yeah.
But I really think it's his net until he loses it.
Are you referring to his opening presser?
When he got introduced as the coach of the team, yeah.
He did recently say before they went to Europe that like goaltending was depending on play. Like it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a given that
Of course not. Yeah.
If somebody struggles, that he's not going to hesitate to go to the other guy. That's the benefit of having a potential 1-2 monster, and not much like when he had Miller and Baron. And you could even say that he probably didn't use Baron enough, during those heyday years with Miller. Having that type of an advantage, possibly over other teams, having that two-headed monster. So, Walt, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd probably say like 50 or so games at UPL, 32 to Levi, barring no injuries. I think Levi, he has potential to take over the net if UPL struggles. I think the thing with UPL last year was he didn't only post good numbers, he posted them like consistently over almost every game he played in. He was one of the more consistent goalies in the NHL. So if he plays anything like he did last year, I don't think he's given up that net, at least in terms of being the starter. So I think UPL is definitely the front runner to get the lion's share of the games this year, but I do think Levi will also get his fair share of games.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Steve Noble again with another question. Bottom six additions will take some PK minutes away from our top six and allow them to focus more offensively. I look for us to score much more this year because of that. It's actually a pretty good point.
Yeah, I would say the impact of the bottom six could be significant. You still need them to score some, right? Like you still need secondary scoring from the bottom six of your lineup. And I think aside from McLeod, who he produced in a role when he was with Draisaitl, especially at 5-on-5, those three guys on the bottom line, Melanson, Lafferty, and Aube-Kubel, they aren't necessarily known for their goal scoring. And neither were Zemgus Girgensons and Kyle Okposo, especially later in his career. But you're going to need some type of production from them in the bottom half of your lineup. But I would say just in terms of their impact defensively, they're going to hit a lot. They're going to be hopefully responsible in their defensive zone, and they're going to play with speed, and they're going to be sticks on pucks, and they're going to be the types of players that this team hasn't necessarily had in a long time. Obviously, Girgensons played that type of game, but he really didn't provide any type of spark offensively aside from the occasional goal every 20 games here and there. So, yeah, I mean, I think obviously Greenway was one of the better penalty killers in the league last season. And I think currently I could see him on that third line with Zucker and McLeod. But the combination
him,
of
right?
What's that?
I keep forgetting about Greenway that he's on this team. Like we go he kind of sneaks in there. He is definitely a Lindy Ruff type player.
Yeah, I could see him having a legitimate role. He's not the fastest guy, but he was a really good penalty killer. And in points last season, he was a really good player for the team. So the combination of all of that, yeah, they're going to take some penalty. Hopefully, Tage will never play on the penalty kill again. Hopefully, Alex Tuch is
shots with his hand.
Yeah, Alex Tuch is never on the penalty kill. JJ Peterka is never on the penalty kill. And you have a distinct delineation between your top six and your bottom six. So I do think it will have an impact, and hopefully there is a method to the madness of what a lot of people believed wasn't enough this offseason in terms of their free agent additions.
What defenseman is going to thrive? I'm going to bring up this comment again here in a second. What defenseman is going to thrive the most under Lindy?
For me, I'd probably say Bowen Byram. I know during that first scrimmage, he said Bowen Byram was a player he was most impressed by during that scrimmage. And I think there's really nowhere but up Byram could go from here after the past few seasons he's had. I think he's really struggled in both Colorado and Buffalo. So I think he's a guy who, even if he plays like 50% of what he was like that Cup season with Colorado, I think he'll be a fantastic defenseman for the Sabres and be marked as an improved player. So I'd have to go with Bowen Byram for me, just because I think he has the highest ceiling, and I think he has probably the best ability to reach that ceiling underneath the new, more aggressive system.
I think it's Dahlin, personally. I think the captaincy was a clear choice from Lindy and the coaching staff. And I think he's going to take that responsibility and apply it to his game, which is already obviously very good. I think at his best, he's a top 5 defenseman in the league. And if he's able to add that offensive upside that we've seen throughout his career to the physicality and the defensive responsibility, which has made him such a well-rounded defenseman, I think the combination of all of that will bring him to stratospheric levels, to be honest. I really do believe that Dahlin is one of the best defensemen in the league, and I think a lot of people around the league know that. You look at his underlying numbers that were posted around the internet, especially after he was named captain, and he effectively does nothing wrong, and he played 25, 30-plus minutes a night last season in a role that was absolutely critical to the defense being as good as it was. And he's, as I just mentioned, he's added a level of physicality to his game, which I think Lindy is only going to emphasize. And he's bigger and he's stronger and he's more mature than he was, obviously, when he came into the league as an 18-year-old. So I do think it's Dahlin, and I think there's a legitimate possibility he could have 70-plus points and be a Norris Trophy finalist this season at his ceiling under Lindy Ruff.
I definitely don't disagree with you, but I'm gonna go with Owen Power. Because we know we've seen what Dahlin's capable of under multiple coaches now. We know he's got another level he's going to go to your point. You know, he's going to bridge Norris candidate guy for a couple of years now. You know, the expectation that he's going to be there. The guy that I think and again, I could say the same thing about Bowen Byram. We're waiting for Owen Power to make that jump, right? And I think that one of my biggest criticisms, everybody knows, is I just didn't think that he played to his size. And I think you're lying if you're disagreeing with that. And when you say that, you're not going out there and playing the way Lindy did. You know, you're not going out there and punching somebody in the mouth when they're standing in front of your net. You're not, it's just imposing your size on people. Playing like you're bigger than them. If somebody that's 5'11", 6 foot is standing side by side with you in front of the net, just leaning into them and forcing your will on them. We didn't see that from Owen Power last year. Not enough, at least. Not nearly enough. And I think that type of style is, that Lindy played with, that he's always coached with, and that going back to that accountability, that's going to rub off on a guy like Owen Power quite a bit. Because we know what he can do offensively. He's going to make those jumps offensively. We know how well he can move the puck. Maybe he's not as skilled as in that respect as Dahlin, but we know he's very, very, very good. And I think you're going to see him go to the net more, much like he used to do at Michigan. I think Lindy's going to help bring that out of him. And he's not going to be soft in his own zone anymore. He's going to play with a little sandpaper. And I think Sabres fans have been begging for that. So I'm going to go Owen Power here. As much as I agree with Walt on Bowen Byram, and I don't disagree with you, Connor, but I think that Dahlin doesn't need Lindy to do what Connor said. I think that's there. We all knew that he was probably going to be the captain. Those qualities were already there. Is he going to help bring that out more and help expose it more and help pull spotlight more? Absolutely. But in terms of who's going to thrive the most this season, I'm going to go with Owen Power. But I could make an argument as much as Walt did for Bowen Byram.
Yeah, I think Power is going to be a little bit tougher in front of his own net. That only comes with experience and maturity. And I think Lindy is going to help with that. And I also believe he's going to be much better offensively. They were talking today about the impact of getting more pucks on net, more tips, more screens, more deflections, and how that's going to help the defense produce from the point, especially on the power play. Power will, maybe Byram and Power will be on that second power play unit, but I do think they're both going to benefit offensively from having a greater net front presence. And I think the combinations, it's likely going to be Byram and Dahlin. I think that largely worked pretty well together once Byram came over. I think it'll probably be Power and Jokiharju. Their numbers weren't amazing last season, but the ability to have a left-hand right shot defenseman with Power and Jokiharju, and then Samuelsson and Clifton would be beneficial, at least to start. And you see how they play, and you go from there. Obviously, Samuelsson has to prove that he can last the entire physicality of an NHL season, right? And Clifton obviously brings some jam, and he hits a good amount for a smaller defenseman. And I think he needs to be better in his own end as well. But I think those six is at least, of course, it's very similar to last season when they were at their healthiest. But I'm okay with that being their six defensemen and those pairings just going into the season. And then you go from there with combinations depending on what works.
I couldn't agree with you more. So Samuelsson and Clifton stay with them staying with Sammy staying healthy. That could be a really mean third pairing, him and Clifton for sure. I think you're definitely right there. So you have Byram slot. Has that been the consistent top line? They haven't separated them two when playing together, Byram and Dahlin?
Well, Dahlin was hurt, so you haven't seen a lot of it.
Yeah. You imagine that's – didn't they say he doesn't mind playing that offside? Like he's comfortable?
I would say that was largely the case at the end of last season.
So I tend to agree there too. So I almost forgot that Dahlin was hurt. So interesting question here. Not question, but he made a comment here at the end from Josh Picaro. What offensive player do you think is going to thrive the most under Lindy?
I'd say for me, I think it's the guys that score the most off the rush. So I think it's just about every player in the Sabres top six. Because I think when Lindy was with New Jersey, when they were playing their best hockey, they had their defensemen kill plays early, get pucks up to the forwards, and kind of beat teams on that counterattack. And that's kind of when the Sabres play their best hockey too, playing that type of way in 22-23. So I think that entire top six were all guys that kind of thrived in rush-based hockey, like Thompson, Peterka, Tuck, Cousins, Quinn. Like all those guys had great offensive numbers just playing that style of hockey at 5-on-5. So I think those five guys, tossing Zach Benson too. I know he wasn't around for that good offensive Sabres year, but I think he'll definitely get a piece of that pie as well. So I'd say the top six, I think those are guys who really turn the dial up offensively. I'm still not sold on the bottom six producing much offensively, but I think like what was brought up earlier about how that bottom six, that fourth line, if you give them a ton of PK minutes, you don't have to give them much 5-on-5 minutes. You could give more 5-on-5 minutes to your top two lines.
I that's one thing with Lindy too. He is not going to shy away from playing his guys longer than say Granato used to. Like, it wasn't very rare. It was rare that you saw Granato really double shift guys last season, even when, he would roll his line. Sometimes he cut the fourth line out, but how many times did we see Kyle Okposo out there in the last minute of a game in a 1-goal or 2-goal? You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to see that kind of stuff under Lindy, man. He's going to put his guns out there. He's not going to be afraid. These kids are young. They can handle it, especially early in the season. I think for sure, to your point, like those guys in the bottom six are going to be expected to eat up the bulk of the PK minutes, play some 5-on-5, but you're never going to see a bottom six guy on probably either of your power play units. Maybe if for some reason, maybe if Kulik's down on your third line, you see him on the second power play unit. But outside of that, those guys are going to eat up, minimal 5-on-5 time, but for the most part, they're going to be your PK guys.
Yeah, to Walt's point about the rush, I think that benefits Peterka the most with his speed and his ability to get up and down the ice as fast as he does, and as we saw all of last season as the Sabres' most consistent forward all year long. I think he's really, really going to benefit from that style of play. Getting the puck from our puck-moving defenseman, getting it through the neutral zone, and getting past the D. He's obviously very fast, but he also was able to produce at a pretty high clip last season. I think it was 29 goals, second highest on the team, which is crazy to say, given that I would say Tage was injured most of the year, and he still scored the most goals on the team. I would say that is another good sign that if he does remain healthy this year, that we could see Tage Thompson return to that 40-goal scorer that we saw in 2022, 2023. But putting Peterka on that top line with Tage and Tuck, and in his third full season in the NHL, I think is going to be absolutely massive for him. I could see 30, 35 goals, 60, 65 points from Peterka this season. And that's going to be huge because it's going to take a lot of pressure off Tage and Tuck. And then also that second line which likely it's looking like Benson, Cousins, and Quinn, and having that chemistry between Cousins and Quinn together. They both play with a good amount of speed, and obviously Benson is a really good two-way player. So I think the top six itself is, like Walt said, is really going to benefit from that type of defense to offense transition in the neutral zone and playing with a lot of speed.
I definitely agree with you, Hurls. It's going to be Peterka, I think. He's a well-rounded 200-foot player. He plays with a ton of speed. He's not afraid to get into the dirty areas of the ice, dig out pucks out of a corner. He really is the complete player. And if I'm going to say, I'll say this right now, that was an absolute grand slam from Kevin Adams. I remember watching that blue and gold embedded video when they drafted him and how excited he was that Peterka was there in the second round. And I think he traded up for him too. Like when he was still there, he definitely 99.9% bet he traded up for him. The grand slam there from Kevin Adams for sure. One of the, when you look back at what he's done so far outside of banking on potential and ceilings when he signs contracts and getting these deals done early and long term, that in my opinion has been the best thing he has done. Is in draft wise is getting that kid. And like I said, man, he's going to earn every single penny of whatever contract he signs. I know they're there's another thing too. Are they making a mistake waiting on signing him and Quinn? Like, don't you think you'd want to get, especially when you're putting Peterka on a top line with Tage and Tuck after a 30-goal season, like you would expect that he's going to pop off here if he stays healthy and put up 40, possibly 40. Like, is it a mistake waiting to sign these guys? Like, possibly even mid-season?
I mean, I think if you're confident in this team, confident in Lindy, kind of bring these guys back to their true potential, I think it probably is a mistake. I think Quinn, when he was healthy last year, he was one of the top 5-on-5 per 60 point producers in the NHL, up there with some of the elite players. And then you have a guy like Peterka who nearly scored 30 last season. Will be in a better offensive system this year, also in a bigger role as well with proven offensive guys like Tage and Tuck. So I think if you truly are confident in the team you built and that this team will have a good season, then yeah, I do think it's a mistake not really trying hard to get those contracts done this offseason because it doesn't really sound like they pushed too hard to get those done now.
I think them doing a similar type of situation that they did with Tage and Cousins is probably giving them a little bit of hesitancy when it comes to Peterka and Quinn. Obviously, you sign them to those 7-year deals, and they're making upwards of 7.5, 7.7 million. And they had those first two breakout years, especially in 2022, 2023. And then last year, they took a step back a little bit. And obviously, with questions surrounding this team in terms of the expectations and the drought and the 13 years, of course, I think that might be part of their thinking that they don't want to overstep in a way that they've already done that. I think Peterka and Quinn, to Walt's point, are probably different situations given how young they are and how well they've already produced in the NHL. And if you just project their numbers and their metrics moving forward, I think signing them to those types of bridge deals, you're not going to pay them more than you pay Tage and Cousins. But if they were willing to sign those types of deals right now, I think you absolutely say yes to that. And I don't think it's out of the question. They've gone to the final hour in the beginning of the regular season with some of these deals. I think the deals for Darlene and Power happened the 2 nights before the season last year, if I'm not mistaken. So, especially in Peterka's, they were in his home country, right near his home country. I could see something potentially being done before the beginning of this regular season. Maybe Quinn a little bit less so, given the injuries last season, just to make sure that he's fully back to 100% and can produce in a top 6 role. But I'm not completely ruling out them getting a 7.75 similar type of deal to Tage and Cousins done with Peterka before the beginning of the season. And if they don't, it's not the end of the world. I think you can still get that deal done during the year. You could get it done after the year. You might have to pay a little bit more. But he's a guy that you're going to want on your team regardless. And he's going to be a top 6 guy moving forward.
I personally think if you were to sign him right now, 8 years, like what's the number? Peterka. I'm not going to talk about Jack Quinn because to your point, like he needs to play. I know he played a 72 game season, but this was like his second serious injury that he's dealt with. I think Kevin Adams, in terms of Jack Quinn, would probably err on a side of caution before signing him to like a long-term deal. But like judging from his history with banking on potential, if you were to find out that he signed an 8-year deal tomorrow, what's the number? What's the cap hit?
I think for me, I'd be trying to get that cap hit lower than if he were to have like a Tage type of breakout season. So I'd say like $6.5 million. I think if you could lock him in at that price for 8 years, I think it makes sense for both parties. I think Peterka may be betting against himself a little bit, but I think if you could get that guaranteed money for that long, I think the guy like Peterka, I could see him taking it.
Yeah, I was going to say 6.5, 7, in that $50-55 million range. I do agree with Walt there that might not be in his own best interest, given that he's now on the top line on power play 1. He's in his 3rd full NHL season, and he had a mini breakout last year. So signing that, it's not a bridge deal, but he's technically would be doing what Tage and Cousins did and taking a little bit of a discount. So, yeah, I could see it, and I hope that they would be able to do it because I think that would be good for the team, given his projection and his ability to improve moving forward. But, yeah, I think that would make the negotiation a little bit difficult because theoretically if he scores 35 goals this season and he puts up 65, 70 points, he's probably going to make a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think if you can get him done at 7.5 right now, I think you do it because I think he's going to be worth every penny.
Yeah, but
I really do. I mean, you might alienate guys like Tage a little bit who've had 40, almost a 50 goal season, but 7.5. That's like my number right now, and I would not hesitate, especially with JJ Peterka. Again, Jack Quinn's a different story. I don't really want to talk about that just because it's just so hard it's so hard. Like you've seen comparables sign this past off season, but those guys have also not dealt with the same injuries that you've dealt with Jack Quinn. I know there's some unique and incredible skill there. He's such a creative player, such great hands, phenomenal finish. But at the end of the day, it might not be as bad as Samuelsson, but are you willing to commit that type of a bankroll to a player who you're not fully confident is going to stay healthy?
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. I think with both guys, I think you're kind of looking at like if they have a breakout season or kind of like what you expect to be a realistic breakout season, like what do you think you'll be paying them after that? Like if they're kind of looking for that money now, then I think it does make sense to wait because I do think if they have kind of a down year, the team doesn't do as well. I think not only are you looking at probably a cheaper cost for them, you're probably kind of looking at a whole new vision for how this team is built almost. Because I think if this team doesn't make it to the playoffs this season, I think it would be hard to kind of justify keeping the gang together and kind of running it back again. So I think buying that extra year kind of also gives you time with that. So I guess it does make sense in a way for the Sabres, but at the same time, it's just kind of like a tricky situation.
I agree. Any predictions going into like how tough is this back-to-back against the Devils going to be? How imperative is it at least to come out of this one-on-one heading into a home opener against a tough Kings team?
I would say it's going to be tough, but I think the Sabres were pretty intelligent about going over to Europe pretty early and playing that exhibition game with Bayern Munich, with München or whatever that German team that they played. They got there, I think it'll be 5 days earlier than the Devils, and they were already on their initial game week practice on Monday, right as the Devils were arriving this week. And as we've seen with NFL games in the past and these time differences and the time changes, jet lag is a real thing, and it takes time for your body to adjust. And I do believe that they do have a pretty distinct rest and energy advantage heading into that first game, which is going to be, well, it's going to be a normal time for them, but it'll be early for all of us. And I do think that the emphasis on starting fast, especially in that first game, we'll see if it actually happens, but I think it's going to be really, really important to get off to that fast start. And I think Lindy's actually going to emphasize that as much as he possibly can, especially against his old team, who by large, obviously the fan base wanted him gone, and he kind of took the brunt of the criticism when it probably should have gone to the management and to the goaltending. But it's a bit of a revenge game for him. So it's absolutely important to get at least 2 points out of this weekend. And I expect them to win that first game on Friday. I really do. I think this team is going to have a little bit of an energy advantage, and I think they're going to come out and hopefully win a 3-2, 3-1 type game.
Yeah, I think if you start 0-2-0 or 0-1-1 with this series, I think you're in pretty rough shape. I think, like Connor said, with a guy like Lindy Ruff playing his old team, the team that just fired him, I think there's some motivation there. I think just losing those 2 games, I know Lindy's been through a lot as a coach. He has a ton of experience, but kind of when you're getting towards that tail end of your career, you're probably wondering a bit like, do I still have what it takes to be a winning coach in this league? And I think not getting at least one win in New Jersey will kind of make those thoughts kind of run through his head. So I think getting at least one win there is huge. I think 2 wins would be absolutely massive. I think just kind of building that momentum and not falling too far behind is huge for this season.
I want to hit some of the peanut gallery comments here in a second, but I'll listen. Could you imagine coming back home up to 2-0 record? Could you imagine Lindy Ruff on the bench? That introduction.
Yeah.
I mean, they start this. They're probably not starting the season in the goat heads, but like I could only imagine Sabretooth dropping down from the rafters onto an ATV. Just they're gonna go all out that night. They have to, right? Like you have to Lindy back. Like leave no stone unturned. Like I don't care. Bring everybody back. Like bring anybody he ever played with back that's still alive. Bring everyone back. Bring all the former. I don't even care. Just go all out for this for the fans because, I know we've joked about in the past before he actually finally was hired back, but like, how cool of a moment would it be, the full circle moment, to have Lindy Ruff back and have him be the guy to end this miserable 10 more times, 13-year drought that started when he left. Like, just real full circle. And how incredible is that atmosphere going to be on opening night? Like the walls will be shaking, I think.
Yeah, and I honestly think they will be, even if like theoretically they go 0-2. Just from a PR perspective and a nostalgia perspective, as I mentioned earlier, like this is the smartest thing they could have done in terms of getting fans back into the building, at least initially. Of course, if they get off to a slow start in their first 10, and it's emblematic of the changes that we wish we saw this offseason. They're not scoring goals. The defense is about the same. Let's say the goaltending's not as good as it was last season. It's going to be rough. And I don't necessarily think that the ire of the fan base is going to go towards Lindy Ruff. I think it'll largely go towards Kevin Adams and Terry Bagula for not doing enough. But a combination of a variety of different things in this first weekend, especially being a team that's a little bit harder to play against, and also is more creative offensively, especially in the power play, is going to go a long way to winning over these fans and getting people back in the building. So I do envision at least 2 points, hopefully 3 out of this weekend, and then you go from there and you try to win more games at home this season. I mean, it was better than they were in 2022, 2023. They were 21-19-1 at home last year, 18-18-5 away, which obviously a 500 team in both aspects. But having a home ice advantage is also huge this season, especially in the first period. They a lot of times got down early, especially in the first period on home ice, which doesn't make sense at all. And as we saw with Harrington and Okposo last year, I think there was a disconnect between the team and the fan base. But you're going to win that fan base back real quick if you win early on in this season and you get off to a hot start like they did in 2018, in 2019, and even portions of 20 and 2021. So I think that's going to be huge moving forward, and this weekend is a big start to that.
I couldn't agree with you more. Couple of comments here. I definitely want to try and get to most of them. Chris Dirk, I just want to see his team ready to play and come out ready to play inspiring hockey to start the year. I would really hate to come out flat. I can feel the atmosphere in locker room is different with Ruff. I mean, we already knew that was going to be a thing when Ruff came in. Like, it's going to be a no-nonsense thing. He's going to keep it loose. He's not the Lindy Ruff of old, but at the end of the day, accountability and, you're not going to see a team come out flat as often as it did under Granada with Lindy Ruff behind your bench. It's just not going to be allowed. From Scott Blakely, I haven't watched the Sabres since the Adams division, Quebec Nordiques and Hartford Whalers. God, I want the Sabres to be good again. Where have you been, bud? This is my first Sabres game since the tank year. I am super hyped to see a fast, exciting team that we haven't seen since Ruff left. From Josh, thanks for having this show tonight since we only get about 6 minutes of hockey talk per day from WGR. This is making me pumped for Friday. Appreciate you always hopping on with us, Josh. Again, from Steve Noble, I think Benson has a very solid season. 50 points would not surprise me, especially if he plays with Cousins and Quinn. That's probably where he's slotted in, right? You imagine he would probably play with them too.
Seems like it at the moment, especially if Kulik is not going to take that spot.
Yep, I agree. Bowen Byram will be a game changer in the Ruff system. Agreeing with you there, Walt. I'm not sure about the Jason Spezza comparison, but I'll go with it. Can somebody make sense a little bit of that comparison? Jason Spezza, did he thrive under a different coach? Maybe.
I forget Ottawa's coaches back in that era.
Yeah, I'm gonna defer to you.
Brian Murray, I remember that.
Yeah,
back in the day.
I'm not too sure, to be honest.
But
maybe a high energy type guy who had some potential early on his career and then had a coaching change and he was able to take his game to another level. How about that?
Yeah, I agree. Steve and Benson, Quinn, Paterka having to get them top 6 minutes. Adams will over is that a less? I don't know what Adams overpaying in free agency for a top 6 forward. Oh, he's agreeing that we did the right thing, I think, by not overpaying rather than playing our kids. I hope it works out like that. But I think you go get a kid, a free agent, because you don't want to risk a major injury and then you're screwed in your top 6. Was the right move to pass on players like Toffoli as an example. I still would take Tyler Toffoli on this team without hesitating at all. He's been good everywhere he's played. Like literally,
we would have taken any legitimate goal scorer in the top 6, given that they lost Jeff Skinner, because more goals helps everybody. But it's not the end of the world getting your guys an opportunity at least early on.
And Adams spent the money better with massively upgrading the bottom 6 and giving it Ruff and a legit 3C with elite speed. Yeah, but you didn't need to buy out Skinner to spend that money on your bottom 6. Like, you could have just spent it. Like, that's the thing. I think that's the thing that gets fans the most upset is the fact that you bought out a guy, a 30-goal scorer. You didn't replace those 30 goals, and then you didn't spend the money, at all. You already had the money to spend. You spend it on the Jumbotron, realistically.
Yeah. No, I think that's kind of the thing with this offseason was that you're going to have to spend that $2 million of that Skinner cap penalty, like when you're hoping this team's going to be contenders, and that's like not money you could trade away. That's not money you could hide. Like that's going to be on the Sabres balance sheet, that $2 million from buying out Skinner when they did. And I think that's probably one of the more frustrating parts, even as frustrating as not spending the money they're saving on that Skinner buyout this season.
That's definitely it. Well, they utilize it. I don't kid about that, man. I think that's where the Skinner money went on that state of the art scoreboard.
Yeah.
Key is to look at the season in blocks of 10 goals. In my opinion, is 6-4 after 10 would be ideal. Put us in a nice spot. I'd be thrilled if they're like 6-4 or even 5-5 to start the season, because we don't want to start things off the way we did last year, right? Going into a hole early, playing your 21-year-old goalie 5 games in a row, like the way the season started last season went completely off the rails. So, any final thoughts from you guys?
So I was just looking at the numbers from 2022 and 2023 compared to 2023 and 2024. Obviously, record in points, home and away. But I found it really interesting in terms of the actual goals for and goals against from last year, from 2 seasons ago going to the last season. So 2 seasons ago, they scored 296 goals, which is obviously a lot. And I think in our season preview last season, we mentioned there was a chance for negative regression. Obviously, they had a lot of games last season where they scored 7, 8, 9 goals, and Tage and Tuck and Cousins had these amazing breakout seasons. In 2023-2024, they only scored 246 goals. So they scored 50 less goals last season, which is a significant decrease. I think if you get into that 275, 280 goal range, while keeping your defensive numbers from last season as well. So while they scored 50 less goals, they also gave up 56 less goals. It went from 300 to 244. So a combination of, I'd say, 275, 280 goals for, and I'd say maybe 245, 250 goals against would be emblematic of a team that has made strides at both ends of the ice. I think that's going to be absolutely crucial to making this team a contender. Obviously, increasing the offensive output, and that is going to be largely on that top 6, which, as it currently stands, I feel pretty good about. We are but we're placing a lot of faith in a 20-year-old Zach Benson in his second NHL season in a top 6 role. But I think all 3 of us really like his game, especially with 2 pretty established players, still very young in Cousins and Quinn. But it's also that power play, as we mentioned. It needs to be a top 15 unit. If it's as bad or worse as it was last season, this team is going to miss the playoffs in impressive fashion. It's going to be absolutely abysmal because they're not going to get the type of goal scoring that they did in 2022, 2023. So I envision somewhere in that hopefully 90 to 95 point range. In 2022, 2023, they were 42, 33, and 7, and they had 91 points. And as we all know, they missed the playoff by 1 point. Last season, they were 39, 37, and 6, 84 points, and missed the playoffs by 5 or 6 wins. Hopefully in that 40 to 45 win range, gets you into that wild card range, and then you go from there and break the 13-year playoff drought. But with the additions to the bottom 6 and hopefully a little bit better injury luck, improved goaltending even from last season, and similar levels of defense, I think there are reasons for optimism, even with the, I would say, mild disappointment of the free agent additions this offseason.
Thoughts, Walt?
Yeah, I mean, I think making the playoffs in the NHL isn't something that is like as difficult as the Sabres and even teams like the Red Wings and Senators are making it seem. And just seeing a team like the Capitals get in the playoffs last year while being outscored last season, I think was pretty crazy. And I think that kind of boils down to just game management. I think the Capitals are a lot better at finishing off those close games and getting points. Sabres last season, they're just awful at pushing games into overtime. They lost a bunch of 1-goal games where they're just hunting for that goal in the final minute with the goalie pulled and they couldn't pull it off, or just games that they lost in overtime, or just a lot of points lost just to kind of undisciplined play. So I think the hope with Lindy is, like, as a motivator, he's one of those guys you can step in and kind of push his team to tie up games or maybe take on a late lead against teams, kind of like what the Capitals are better at doing. So I think if you just factor that in with just similar play, it doesn't even have to be that improved play, I think there's a chance the Sabres team makes it to the playoffs. So I think that's really the hope this season with Lindy is just better game management. I don't think the on-ice play has to be too much better to make it to the playoffs, but if it's just a little bit better, combine that with the management, I think they have a shot at the playoffs this season.
I couldn't agree with you more there, Walt. I think the biggest thing for me is looking like you're ready to play every single night. There were too many times we questioned this team's, readiness, just were they prepared? Both, just looking flat, uninspired. Like that's just not going to happen under Lindy Ruff, man. It'll be a cold day in hell when Lindy Ruff allows his team to do that for more than one game. I think the first time it happens will probably be the last time it happens. And if it happens again, guess what? You're probably not on the team anymore. Because I think from the moves that were made this offseason, this team is a Lindy Ruff hockey team. And if they don't want to play like Lindy Ruff hockey team, well, unless you're, a guy on an 8-year deal, there's the door. But yeah, that's the biggest thing for me is they're going to be ready to play every night, and they're going to play inspiring hockey. They're going to play for the fans, much like we saw 2 years ago, where you felt inspired almost every night. I'm not really sure where that went last season, but I couldn't be more excited. My last couple thoughts here before we get out of here in the next minute or two. How cool! I don't know if do you guys see Lance tweeted out that he got to watch Jaromir Jagr play a professional hockey
game?
Yeah. Yeah.
How sick is that? That's just probably just sitting there getting ready to kind of cover the team, and out walks Jaromir Jagr. What is he, 52 now, or is it getting damn near close?
It's crazy. And top Czech league too, I think.
Yeah, and he's still like he posts these like these videos on his Instagram where he's like, different. He's not even scoring goals. He's just like protecting the puck, floating passes, and it's just set to this really like odd, like monotone music, almost kind of like I don't know, maybe that's the type of music they have over there, but it's kind of funny. And another non-serious couple clicks for Jeremy Brodeur, right? Why wasn't that a bigger story? Like the son of Marty Brodeur is making his debut in net for the Devil. Like, why? I don't understand. It's preseason, but you'd think that would have been a bigger deal, right? Why did I find that out in a tweet after it happened? Like,
I don't know. I'd never heard of the kid, to be honest. Well,
neither did I
think you're probably more in tune with prospects than we are.
Yeah, I do remember he had one son that got drafted by the Devils, but it was a really long time ago. It had to be like almost a decade ago of when it happened. I'm not sure if that's the same guy, but I know it's the. Yeah, I know he had one son that got drafted by the Devils like a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, granted, it was against like an ECHL level team, but he's made 29 saves on 30 shots. Yeah, he's 27 years old, but still cool, still pretty cool. I'd say this. And then I'm just happy we're not Boston Bruins fans, not having no idea when they're going to have their starting goalie back. Cam Neely's out there throwing $64 million around, and then their team's coming back. It's like, we have no idea what you're talking about. Just an absolute shit show in Beantown. Looks like they're going to be riding Korpisalo. When do the Sabres play Boston?
Don't know off the top of my head, but I do think they're going to get that done. I think
you want $10 million, man.
These types of situations happen in sports pretty often. I think we saw it in the NFL with Brandon Ayuk leading up to the NFL season. There was a lot of drama involved in that, and then they ended up paying him, and it turns out he's playing absolutely horribly. But I would say that when it's a starting goalie and you just got rid or you traded your other legitimate caliber starting goalie in Linus Ullmark, for them to compete this season, they're not going to be able to survive the entire season with a combination of Korpisalo and whoever their other backup is. So as tough as Don Sweeney wants to be to the media and say that he has 64 million reasons to play, Jeremy Swayman has proved that he's a top 5 goalie in the league, and I think they're going to get it done.
Great. I don't know for 10 million. I hope for Bruins fans' sake, hopefully it comes some type of compromise, but it's a lot of money. You all know me, man. I'm not in favor of paying goalies that much money. As a goalie, I think it's stupid. I think it's just dumb. But thanks, Walt, for hopping on with us. It's always a pleasure, bud. Just remember, this has been brought to you by Fatty Beer Company, Western New York's premier market and tap room, with over 300 beers to choose from at 8 different Western New York locations. Fatty Beer gives you the same vibes you're feeling right now for the Sabres, and just an incredible atmosphere for all your Sabres game nights and Bills game days. Make sure you head over to your local Fatty Beer. Tell them 2 goalies when Mike sent you. And as always, Buffalo Go Apparel. Make sure you pick up all of your apparel needs, whether it's the Bills or the Sabres, from buffalogo.com, at Buffalo Co. on Instagram and Twitter, at Fatty Beer on Instagram and Twitter. I am Duane for Connor Hurls and Walt. You better know him as Sabermetrics on Twitter. This has been episode 123 of 2 Goalies, 1 Mike. Signing off. We will talk to you actually probably Friday night. I will not be on after the game because that is like what time's face off?
I think 1 p.m.
I think
PM.
it's,
yeah, I mean,
10 a.m. Pacific for me. Yeah, so it's 1 p.m. Eastern.
Oh my God, yeah. So probably not right after the game, but I will go live on Friday at some point to recap the Sabres opener against the Devils. And then you will definitely see us on Saturday. So with that being said, you guys have a great night. And as always, go Sabres.